Hey guys, so I've been thinking about something for a while now, and the more I look into it, the more uncomfortable I get with the amount of power PSA has over the entire trading card game hobby. Because at some point, you kinda have to stop and ask yourself, why are we trusting these companies so blindly? Like, seriously, think about what people actually do. People send cards worth hundreds, thousands, sometimes even in the tens of thousands of dollars, though through the mail, to a private company and just hope everything goes well. That's insane when you really think about it. And lately, there's been more and more stories about missing submissions, damaged cards, delayed returns, and even PSA donating cards that they didn't actually own. And that's where things start getting really weird to me. Because whenever cards go missing, everybody immediately blames shipping companies like UPS. And sure, theft during shipping absolutely happens. I'm not saying it doesn't. But let's be honest for a second. Who actually knows what's inside these submission boxes? The owner and PSA. That's it. UPS drivers don't know there's a Shadowless Charizard sitting in box number 3. To them, it's just another brown package. So when cards disappear, or when PSA somehow ends up donating customer-owned cards to charity, people are naturally going to start asking questions, and honestly, I think they should. Because this hobby runs almost entirely on trust. And trust without transparency eventually becomes a problem. Now there's another thing that really bothers me. PSA's upcharge system. This is probably one of the most accepted scams in the hobby, and people barely question it anymore. You send in a card expecting one grading fee, and then PSA grades it highly, and suddenly the value goes up. And now you owe them way more money. And PSA says, well, it's because of insurance purposes. But that explanation falls apart really fast. Because shipping insurance does not suddenly cost an extra $100 just because your card got a PSA 10. That's nonsense. What it actually feels like is this. Congratulations, your card graded well. Now pay us more. And think about the incentive structure here. The more valuable the card becomes, the more money PSA can charge. That's a conflict of interest, whether people want to admit it or not. And then it gets even weirder when you realize PSA also lets people store and sell cards through their own systems. So now they're grading cards, holding cards, helping sell cards, and profit off all of it. At what point does a grading company stop being just a grading company? Because from the outside it starts looking less like authentication and more like total control over the market. Now compare that to Technical Authentication and Grading, TAG. And no, this isn't a sponsored thing or me saying TAG is perfect, but at least TAG is trying to be transparent. Their grading is mostly automated. There's way less human involvement. And honestly, I think that matters a lot. Because humans are inconsistent. Humans have biases. Humans have bad days. But with TAG, when your card gets graded, you can actually see why it got the grade it got. There's a QR code on the slab. You scan it, and it literally shows you whether it has whitening, scratches, dents, edge damage, or even centering problems. It tells you everything. It's all right there. That level of transparency completely changes how grading feels. Because with PSA, half the time it feels like somebody rolled a D20 dice behind a curtain. You crack a PSA 9, resubmit it, and suddenly it becomes a 10? How does that make sense? If grading is supposed to be objective, why does it sometimes feel random? And look, I get it. PSA has history. PSA has reputation. PSA has market dominance. A PSA 10 carries insane value. I understand why people use them. But here's the thing a lot of people don't want to admit. PSA cards are only worth more because PSA became the standard. That's it. Years ago, the hobby collectively decided PSA has the trusted name. Or was the trusted name. Because collectors trusted PSA, buyers were willing to pay more for a PSA slab. And once those higher prices became normal, the cycle basically fed itself. Higher value meant more submissions. More submissions meant more dominance. And more dominance reinforced the idea that PSA was the gold standard. But standards can change. Right now, tag slabs usually sell for less than PSA slabs. Not necessarily because tag grading is worse, but because tag is newer. People simply trust PSA more right now. Or at least, they used to. Because slowly but surely, that trust is starting to erode. And honestly, I think PSA's biggest threat isn't another grading company. It's transparency. Because once collectors experience a system where they can actually see why a card got a grade, it becomes harder to accept vague answers and inconsistent results. And if the community actually shifted behind tag because of that transparency and consistency, then the market shifts too. Because value in this hobby is heavily based on confidence. If collectors start believing tag grades are more accurate and more trustworthy than PSA grades, then eventually tag slabs could become more valuable than PSA slabs. Not overnight, obviously. Those things take time. But hobbies evolve. Markets evolve. And companies that refuse to adapt eventually get replaced. There's an old saying, slow and steady wins the race. And honestly, that might end up being tag's entire strategy. Because right now, a lot of this hobby still runs on blind faith. And the second collectors stop believing, the entire system starts looking very fragile. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.